Black Widow has finally gotten her own standalone movie, and it only took 24 movies and her death to happen. And in this video, we are going to compare it to a previous MCU film with a very similar spy thriller genre, Captain America: The Winter Soldier. And in this video, we are going to compare both movies and see which movie has the better story, and also which movie gives Black Widow the superior story and character arc. Let the battle commence. Now, something that both of these movies have in common is that they are darker MCU movies. The Winter Soldier is a grittier spy espionage movie, and it delves into the themes of internal corruption and betrayal, and both Captain America and Black Widow are on the run from S.H.I.E.L.D. Or what we think is S.H.I.E.L.D., but we really find out is a secret division inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. called Hydra, and they have to figure out their place in the world as they are now fighting the very organization they have been fighting with. And this is a dark subject matter. Now, Black Widow has a dark subject matter too, that being that young girls are forcefully subjected to the Black Widow program against their will, but the story unfortunately doesn't get any darker than the opening credits scene, and the movie never utilizes its darker tones as effectively or smartly as the Winter Soldier did. Just take a look at one of the darker scenes in the Winter Soldier when the villain's housemaid returns and sees him in the room with the Winter Soldier.
Oh, Renata, I wish you would have knocked.
Now that was a dark scene, but it fit the overall darker story, which is about corruption inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. And it's telling us that the people that have been posing as good guys are actually really bad people that are capable of some truly evil and merciless crimes. This death didn't happen just to be dark, it happened to show you just how evil these people are and how the Winter Soldier here doesn't even flinch when an innocent dies right in front of him. This moment is especially important when you find out who the Winter Soldier is. So the darker violence actually enhances the characters as well as the dark story about corruption. But Black Widow waters its dark story down, so unlike the Winter Soldier, the darker violence does not match the darker story, and it's not telling us anything by being violent. It just uses some darker violence to give you the illusion that it's telling you a more adult story, but the story itself is unfortunately very watered down from what a Black Widow movie should be. And then we cut to some jokey scenes that feel like they are pulled right out of pretty much any other more light-hearted MCU movie, and these lighter scenes don't match the darker spy movie that we just saw, so tonally, the darker tone in this movie feels off. And it makes the more adult moments fun to look at, but unnecessary, as the violence itself doesn't go with the darker storytelling like the Winter Soldier did. So tonally, the Winter Soldier is much more consistent and far better at being a spy espionage film, and its tone matches the darker story that it's trying to tell. And throughout the movie, you feel the danger of the story constantly hovering over the heads of our heroes. Now, in Black Widow's case, right from the beginning of the movie, you'll notice that the stakes of the film would have been far higher if it had released right after Civil War, because the fact that it's coming out now when Civil War felt so long ago, I just can't get invested in this kind of story anymore, because its time has come and gone, especially now that Natasha is dead and we know that nothing is going to happen to her by the end of this movie. It really does give the film a severe lack of stakes that the Winter Soldier had in spades, and that's not helped by the fact that it uses a staple MCU humor that just ruins the more serious tone of this film. Now, the Winter Soldier had jokes, and I remembered laughing at all of them. They weren't over the top, and they told you a bit about the character's personality, as well as providing you with just the right level of humor. And you were still invested in the story the whole time.
What's on it?
I don't know.
Stop lying.
I only act like I know everything, Rogers.
In Black Widow, however, there are several jokes that constantly took away from the film's tone and character moments. Saying,
"Just don't make a scene,"
was fine, but saying,
"You made a scene, didn't you?"
was just the most lame and obvious joke they could have gone with. And the dinner table scene, 3 times Natasha says,
"So here's what's gonna happen."
Okay, reunion then. Want to say something right off the bat? You haven't aged a day.
and it all of a sudden turns into the MCU happy hour. And the jokes are very obvious and predictable. If she had given the plan and then they got back to their family dinner and they made all of these jokes, then that would have been fine. But to cut over Natasha as she is trying to explain the plot of the movie, that is just annoying and disruptive.
So here's what's gonna happen.
Natasha, don't slouch.
I'm not slouching.
Yes, you are. You're going to.
I don't slouch.
Listen to your mother.
All right, enough. All of you.
I didn't say anything. That's not fair.
Here's what's gonna
I
happen.
don't want any food.
And this joke of the characters constantly being interrupted is a joke that the MCU have done so many times, and it always drives me crazy when they do this. Don't believe me? Just look.
She discovered that you were building the tunnel. Then she told me about Lang. And the message from Janet inside his head. That's when I knew. Christ's sake!
That's me. I'm sorry.
I mean, before I met Tony, you're gonna need all the help you can get.
Are you done? Are you done?
The high-end community is...
The
high-end community is... It's a tight-knit group. The high-end community is a very tight-knit...
That cyclone had a face. 3 days later, a similar event in Morocco. A village was...
Sorry about that. You were saying?
A village was destroyed by what may well be another world-threatening event.
See, I wasn't kidding when I said they've done this joke so many times, and I know I've missed some out. And you think they would have grown out of it by now, but they just keep doing it. There is even a scene that should have been horrific where Yelena describes what happened to her when she got sterilized, and it was done as a joke.
They kind of just go in and they rip out all of your reproductive organs. They just get right in there and they chop them all away.
Okay, you don't have to get so clinical and nasty.
This kind of character confession should have been serious and tragic, and hard for her to relive and share with someone. I mean, even Joss Whedon didn't make light of this in Age of Ultron when Natasha talks about it, and he turns everything into a joke. But even he thought that this should have been an admission that was treated seriously and with respect. But Black Widow decides to make a joke about it. A joke about how these women had something truly terrible happen to them. And probably the worst joke of the whole movie is that they make a joke about Black Widow's posing. And this was a terrible joke that felt way too meta. More like Marvel were trying to poke fun at their own movies. And you can make jokes like that in movies like Guardians of the Galaxy or Deadpool, but not with a grounded and gritty spy espionage film. You can't all of a sudden go from serious and gritty spy espionage to Deadpool. The two tones don't fit. On the contrary, they clash. And that joke was so freaking stupid and out of place, and I was not amused.
This thing that you do when you whip your hair when you're fighting with the arm and the hair and you do like a fighting pose. It's a fighting pose. You're a total poser.
You're not a poser.
Do you remember what I said about the Falcon and the Winter Soldier series just recently? We get another dumb joke about Bucky staring. I mean, the MCU don't have to joke about everything. I mean, God forbid, can you imagine if the MCU made something with Batman and they said, does Batman always brood like that? Just let him brood. You don't have to be self-aware and bring attention to everything, you know. These personality traits make these characters. Embrace them. Don't mock or make fun of them. Well, they're doing the same thing with Black Widow's posing. You don't have to bring attention to this stuff all the time, Marvel. That just turns it from being cool into very silly. Marvel really need to stop this. And it's certainly not helped that they put this joke into the movie just because they heard Florence Pugh and Scarlett Johansson making jokes about it on set. No, really. That's where they heard the joke and they decided to put it in the movie.
So that the whole me taking the piss out of Scarlett's pose was because on set, in the stunts rehearsal. Anyway, I started taking the piss out of her, and Eric was on set, the writer, and he put that right in. And it
He
just
was like, I'm sorry, I've been listening to this and I love it. And I was there we go.
10 seconds of me prodding you the wrong way, and we get juicy material.
Amazing, amazing.
Do you know what is a bigger joke than this joke? How they chose to put the joke in the movie. I mean, seriously, is this how filmmaking decisions are made nowadays? So despite both movies being very similar with regards to their spy movie tones, The Winter Soldier maintained its tone so much better than Black Widow did. It also had a great story that it fully committed to, whereas Black Widow completely watered down its story about the Black Widow program and lost a ton of its tension by basing the story in a time period where we know that Black Widow is going to be perfectly fine. So the movie with the superior story is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, Captain America: The Winter Soldier and Black Widow have a lot of characters to focus on. In The Winter Soldier, you get Captain America, Falcon, Bucky, Black Widow, Nick Fury, and the villain, whose name I can't remember. And the movie does a very good job of giving all of them an arc, and they all leave their mark and change as characters by the end of the movie. And this was the first movie where I really liked Captain America, and he became my favorite Avenger by the end. And the movie did a great job at further developing the other characters as well, and giving each of them their own character arcs. Now, in Black Widow, the main characters that we focus on are Black Widow, her sister, and her sort of father and sort of mother. Now the biggest dynamic in the film is the relationship between Natasha and her sister Yelena, and they have a lot of scenes together which I honestly thought really did range from being okay to decent. The best interaction between the two is when Yelena tells Natasha that she bought some clothes for herself for the very first time. That I thought was actually a really cute moment. They have gone through so many horrible life experiences together that seeing them have a down-to-earth girly conversation like this feels like a very real sisterly bonding moment between the two, and it's a joke that made me smile. And after they finally stopped joking, we had the emotional part of the dinner scene where Yelena said,
It was real to me, you are my mother. The best part of my life was fake, and none of you told me.
That was a very good scene, and it illustrated the biggest piece of character development for her, and the mother and father who originally took their roles as a job where they had one foot in the relationship and one foot out, by the end of the movie they fully commit to being a family. And although they don't have a great amount to do in the movie, their development was decent and what I ultimately took away from their characters. In terms of having things to do, that's another story. Honestly, the side characters and main characters in The Winter Soldier feel far more relevant and have far more to do than any of the characters in Black Widow. And speaking of Black Widow, they really should have made her future death give you this feeling of dread throughout the movie. Because in the show Star Wars: The Clone Wars, you know that all of these Jedi are going to die in the end, and that all of these clones are going to turn on them and end up dead too. And you enjoy watching the missions they go on, but you can't help but feel this constant negative energy because you feel like they are all going to die in the end. That's the kind of dark atmosphere that this Black Widow movie needed. And it's clearly a dark tone that Disney Marvel don't want to do, but if an animated Star Wars show for Cartoon Network could do it, why couldn't a PG-13 Black Widow movie do it? It just goes to show you can add the blood, but when it comes to storytelling, Marvel is very kid-friendly. So much so that a Cartoon Network series from 13 years ago is showing them up. Now you don't get the feeling of dread in Black Widow, but The Winter Soldier definitely gives you this feeling of isolation that Steve Rogers wants to get his friend back as he is the only thing from his past that seems to be alive. Well, that and a very old Peggy Carter who suffers from Alzheimer's. Again, another sad element that really dives deep into the trauma of Captain America's character, and it really makes you feel for him even more. And for Natasha in this movie, she comes to the realization that she trusted S.H.I.E.L.D. and gave them everything, and in the end, they didn't even trust her.
I wasn't sure who to trust.
And this really devastates her and gives Black Widow an arc in this film as well. Yeah, it gives her an arc and it isn't even her movie. And sadly, you don't get any of this deep character development in Black Widow's standalone movie. They spend so much time establishing and setting her family up for their future films, and it pretty much completely forgets about Natasha. And that to me means that including her family in this movie was a big mistake. Honestly, I feel like the smartest thing to expand on Natasha's story would have been if they had her cross over with Hawkeye. Black Widow and Hawkeye apparently had a lot of missions together in their past. This has been heavily hinted at in previous films, so they should have found a way to have this be a movie about Black Widow and Hawkeye and have their mysterious and dark pasts catch up to them. And then we could have finally been let into their past missions and their history. Instead, we get the Black Widow family, who definitely aren't bad, but they do come across as a very slimy inclusion when you find out this movie's whole purpose and main priority is to set them up for future MCU projects. Don't believe me? Then just ask yourself, what character arc does Black Widow have in this movie? What does she learn? Her family go through an arc and come out of the movie as changed people by the end, but Black Widow learns nothing in this film. She had more of a character arc in every other MCU movie, especially in The Winter Soldier and Civil War and Endgame, but she has no arc in her own film, which honestly is downright insulting. I really don't think I need to say any more on the matter. The movie with the superior utilization of all of its characters, including Black Widow, even though it wasn't even her own movie, is The Winter Soldier. Now I'm not gonna act like the villain in The Winter Soldier is great, because he's not. He's serviceable for this kind of story, but he is by no means a memorable villain. The only memorable thing about him is that he is played by a big actor, but besides that, he has evil plans, but there is nothing about his character that will make him go down as a charismatic and iconic bad guy. He's just serviceable. Now the equivalent villain in Black Widow is this Russian guy whose name I can't remember, and he is one of the people responsible for the Black Widow program, and with that, you would hope to get a lot of questions answered. How did the Black Widow program come about? Why do they choose all women? And I'm sure we would have had a great reason for it if we got this answered years ago, but now they just decide to make him some misogynist asshole. I mean, he recruited women into the Black Widow program because there was too much women in the world and he is just a sexist prick. That feels more like a modern storytelling device, something that filmmakers would do now with the woke mindset. I mean, the origins of the Black Widow program could have been very interesting and it could have been put together by some sort of evil mastermind, but no, it was just put together by some Weinstein kind of dude. I mean, come on, why go down this route? You could have made the origin of the Black Widow so interesting, but instead you go down the 2019 Black Christmas route. And it doesn't help that Black Widow is also copying the Winter Soldier's villain arrangement, with the person of power controlling a mindless minion who has a connection with our main hero. Only Bucky had a much bigger connection to Steve Rogers, as Steve actually knew the guy, and the stupid reveal here has next to no connection with Natasha. I mean, are you telling me that out of everything she has done in her career as Black Widow, that this is the only thing she regrets and sees as a horrible act? Also, Mr. Crappy Villain here has this pheromone which apparently stops Natasha from harming him, which first of all is so stupid. At first I thought she had some device implanted in her ever since she was recruited into the Black Widow program which prevented her from hitting him, but no, they went with pheromones. And Natasha's solution to this was so stupid. It turns out that she knew that he had the pheromones on him because her mother told her earlier, so if that's the case, instead of breaking her nose so she wouldn't smell the pheromones, why didn't her mother just give her a clothes peg instead? Put that on your nose and you won't be able to smell anything. So why did you have to break it? They just made Natasha seem so stupid. I mean, it's common sense. Why damage yourself like that? They can bring in all this tech and weaponry, but they can't bring a clothes peg.
What the hell are you playing at, darling?
Now time to talk about the secondary villain for both films, the minion of the main bad guy. Now the Winter Soldier, I thought he was awesome in this movie. He doesn't turn over a new leaf until the end of the film, but I loved how merciless and brutal he was when he would kill people. And the moments of doubt and conflict he had with himself made him so fascinating to watch, and you wanted him to snap out of his trance so he could become friends with Captain America again. But unfortunately for the characters, that doesn't happen for most of the film, and he is a constant foil for Captain America and Black Widow throughout the film's runtime. Then we have the equivalent villain for Black Widow, which is Taskmaster. And yes, let's just get straight to it. They gender bent the character from a man to a woman. The reveal also felt like a cheat, because throughout the movie, it was clearly a big toned man in the suit, not a woman, so the gender bending reveal felt so cheap. And not to mention that Taskmaster is a guy. Why would you gender bend him into a woman? A big part of his intimidation factor is that he is physically imposing, and you can't get that with even the most built woman. And do you know what? The movie knows this too, because throughout the movie, they have a stuntman in the costume, and if they thought a woman could be equally as physically imposing, then they wouldn't have put a man in the costume. And also, the fighting technique of Taskmaster just didn't feel intimidating or as impossible to fight as it should have. The fight sequences with him, her, were just so forgettable when they should have been the most memorable. I can go on forever with how bad of a villain Taskmaster is and how the gender bending was just so stupid and illogical on so many levels. The biggest of which the movie already admits to by casting a big stuntman to play the character when the mask is on. And there were actually a lot of times where the costume really started to look very cheap, and having her father control her felt like an exact copy of William Stryker in X-Men 2, another overweight villain who has a prejudice towards a big group of people and mind controlled his own damaged child to do his bidding. The only difference being that Stryker was an awesome villain, and this guy was not. And neither was his kid. So both of the villains in Black Widow were terrible. And yes, the movie with the superior main villain and far superior secondary villain is Captain America: The Winter Soldier. Now, the action in The Winter Soldier is awesome. It's gritty, fast-paced, super creative, and out of all of the MCU movies, is probably the most grounded and even realistic at times. The only shame is that the climactic battle falls into the trappings of a conventional and generic MCU action scene. And although it is better than most of the others, it's a shame that it went from being more realistic to over the top. Also, the green screen CGI is very inconsistent and way too obviously fake at times, even back when it came out in 2014. But besides that, I think the action in this movie is actually my favourite of the entire MCU, especially with the hand-to-hand action scene here that the Russo Brothers asked the John Wick guys to choreograph. And it's the best hand-to-hand action scene in the MCU, and really, the action is very inspired and creative in this film. The action in Black Widow, on the other hand, is none of those things. Now, this movie was trying to advertise itself as being very similar to The Winter Soldier with regards to its action, but honestly, as I was watching the action in this movie, I didn't think of The Winter Soldier, I just kept thinking of Mission Impossible, specifically Mission Impossible 6 with a bit of 3 in there as well. First off, the opening action scene with the plane was similar in setup to Mission Impossible 5's opening with a plane. When one of the Black Widow agents die, the main villain activates a chip in her head which instantly kills her, and the damage is visibly shown in her eye. This exact same death happens in Mission Impossible 3. Then we have the car chase scene with motorbikes, and this scene reminded me so much of the chase scene in Mission Impossible 6, except in Black Widow, the stunt people drive so slowly, and they have helmets on which gives them some added protection. In Mission Impossible 6, however, Tom Cruise has no helmet on, and he is absolutely speeding past all of these cars at blazing fast speeds. So what are these stunt people's excuse? And this whole chase scene just comes off as a poor man's Mission Impossible car chase. And in Mission Impossible 6, we have a halo jump scene that was shot in camera with Tom Cruise actually jumping from 25,000 feet, and Black Widow has a skydiving scene which is done as you would expect with typical green screen and an obvious CGI double. That is quite a few big Mission Impossible elements it took, and it does none of them better or even as good. They are just done far worse. Oh, and to top it off, the composer that Marvel hired for this film is Lorne Balfe, and he is the composer for, you guessed it, Mission Impossible 6. So yeah, I rest my case. This movie seems to have taken a lot of inspiration from Mission Impossible, and it is nowhere near the level of quality as the action scenes in those films. And when compared to the action in The Winter Soldier, Black Widow doesn't even compare to that. The car chases were so much better and creative in The Winter Soldier, both the badass chase scene with Nick Fury and the short but still awesome chase against the Winter Soldier. And Bucky as the Winter Soldier in this film posed far more of a threat than Taskmaster did in Black Widow. Bucky's hand-to-hand action scenes are done so well, as are his more exaggerated comic book action scenes, and he felt like a more important part of the overall story, whereas Taskmaster, as we mentioned earlier, was just a wasted character with a bad version of the X-Men 2 plot attached to him. Also, the Winter Soldier's action scenes were much more skillfully directed and edited, whereas the editing in Black Widow's action scenes just didn't make sense at times. Now, how did she open the door and the character ends up a few feet away from the door? And there were some other instances where the action had some weird and choppy editing like this too. There was also no stakes to it. The action in The Winter Soldier had stakes, and although you knew that Captain America wasn't going to die, when he got shot by Bucky towards the end, I genuinely was worried about him. When the Winter Soldier pulled the steering wheel out of their car, I was also really worried for them. But the action in Black Widow never had high stakes with this action like the Winter Soldier did. No matter what happened, I knew she was going to be okay, because she's not going to die until Avengers Endgame. And also, I at first appreciated the detail that she gets injured when they fight, but my appreciation for that detail was soon gone when I saw Black Widow survived all of this insane stuff. Now, Black Widow has always survived some serious injuries in the past, but they are taken to another level in this movie. She survives so much beatings and gets back up as if nothing happened. She's no super soldier, but with the amount of beatings that she takes, it feels like she is. And in a world where there are super soldiers and regular humans, you need to make that distinction, Marvel. Also, this movie used CGI cars during the action scenes, even though any other movie would have done these scenes practically. Even Falcon and the Winter Soldier used CGI here. Yeah, we at Marvel can't even topple real cars anymore. Are the action scenes supposed to be getting better or worse as the Marvel movies go along? I mean, if the old films can topple real cars, why can't the newer films? Also, out of all the action scenes in both of these films, the final climactic battles are the worst of both. But I gotta say, the climactic battle in The Winter Soldier, although very typical MCU and over the top when compared to its more grounded action prior, I just about gave it a pass, because the friendships and character interactions that were going on ultimately made this more than just a typical MCU action scene for me, and it was those interactions that saved the climax for me. Black Widow unfortunately did not have those character interactions, and what remained was a typical MCU climax that honestly was filled with so much CGI where there didn't need to be, and it just felt unoriginal and lazy. So, it isn't even a competition. The movie with the far superior action scenes is The Winter Soldier, and the Mission Impossible movies that Black Widow was trying to rip off. I gotta say, I really am starting to notice a big decline in CGI with Disney lately. All their movies after Avengers Endgame have looked very fake, even though they have huge $200 million budgets behind them. Spider-Man Far From Home special effects look cheap, the effects for Jungle Cruise look dated, and even the Shang-Chi trailer is showing some truly horrendous looking CGI. I mean, take a look at these effects in Black Widow. This tank comes driving in like it's been animated for a video game, from the Nintendo DS. Also, if you look at these effects in this prison amongst all of this snow, in Batman Begins and even Inception, Christopher Nolan did a lot of his snow scenes in camera on location, and he had a very skilled team to do it. But in Black Widow, it's all just green screen. Marvel really are so CGI happy that they don't even go on location to film this stuff anymore, and as a result, their movies are already looking dated, whereas Inception is over 10 years old and it still looks so real to this day, because it was. Now, as for the development that Black Widow gets in both movies, in The Winter Soldier she is the same loyal S.H.I.E.L.D. agent that she has always been to Nick Fury, and once he dies, or so they think, she feels like she has lost something and now feels the need to get revenge and stop the ones responsible for Nick Fury's death. Steve being the last one that saw Fury alive, she realizes that he is hiding something that Nick Fury told him, and as the movie goes on, she slowly starts to loosen up and come out of her shell due to her interactions with Steve Rogers, and when she finds out that Nick Fury faked his death, she can't help but feel a sense of betrayal towards Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D., as she always felt that she could trust them, but it turns out that her trust and loyalty was repaid with distrust, and from this point on, she sides with Steve Rogers, even when he says that they need to shut down S.H.I.E.L.D. for good, much to the bewilderment of Nick Fury. And this is where she turned towards the Avengers to give her the fulfillment of having a family. So Natasha actually goes through a definitive development in The Winter Soldier, and this is not even her movie, but in her own movie, Black Widow, I can't tell you what her character arc even is. All the other characters around her get character arcs of sorts, but she doesn't get anything, and honestly, that alone tells you which is the superior Black Widow movie. It's time for the scores. Captain America: The Winter Soldier gets a 9 out of 10, and Black Widow gets a 5. When you get down to it, The Winter Soldier is a Captain America movie, it's a Winter Soldier movie, it's a Black Widow movie, and it's even a Nick Fury movie. This is one of the many reasons I love this film. Every character has their time to get developed, and you like their characters more than you did previously, and above all, this is the first movie where I really liked the character of Captain America. Prior to this, I thought he was okay, but I wasn't fully on board. But lo and behold, the Russo Brothers came in, and they actually turned my least favorite Avenger into my favorite Avenger. And they only made him get better as they went on. But Black Widow didn't make me like or dislike Natasha Romanoff any more than I already did. Now, Black Widow had a post-credit scene, and this scene was so stupid.
Maybe you'd like a shot at the man responsible for your sister's death. Kind of a cutie, don't you think?
Do you mean to tell me that the Avengers, the very people that Natasha repeatedly tells her sister are her family, the very Avengers that apparently have been giving out tiny details about the battle with Thanos?
She could have taken out Thanos on her own if he hadn't initiated a blitz. I mean, nobody else came close.
Well, I'd argue that Captain Marvel came close.
Are you telling me that they gave Stark a funeral and let the world know what he had sacrificed, and yet they did not tell the world that Black Widow sacrificed her own life in order to help stop Thanos and bring back half of humanity? Because if Yelena buys this lie, then that's exactly what happened. And it makes our Avengers seem somewhat unlikable. The fact that Tony Stark's sacrifice is noticed, but Black Widow's isn't. And this really comes down to the fact that Kevin Feige just wants Yelena to fight Hawkeye in his own show. That's the only reason. And the music acting like this is a big shocking teaser is just stupid and comes off as an incredibly forced conflict. They could just meet each other like normal people during Hawkeye's show. But no, Marvel wants to force a conflict between the two, and they forced it at the expense of making the Avengers seem unlikable and disrespectful to their fallen comrade. This whole movie was just forced and one big setup for future movies with these new characters, rather than just making what we have all wanted in the first place, a great standalone Black Widow movie. The Winter Soldier is a much better Black Widow movie than Black Widow, and she wasn't even the main focus in The Winter Soldier. Captain America, The Winter Soldier, and S.H.I.E.L.D. were, and she was still able to have her own small movie in that. It just goes to show how the Russo brothers are miles better and more skilled with storytelling than all of the other MCU directors, and we need more directors like them in the MCU, because otherwise, we end up with stuff like this.
You're Ralph Boner?
Boner.
So, that's it for another Versus video, guys. I have plenty more on the way, so be sure to click that subscribe button if you haven't already, and click the bell icon so you will stay up to date, even if YouTube doesn't want you to. Also, be sure to follow me on Instagram, because I'm going to start posting a lot more on there, including my brief thoughts on movies and TV shows that I watch. Thanks as always for watching, guys, and I will see all of you next time. Take care.